And so, in essence, it also uses the principles of ABA as well. He's a Andrew Bondi is a behavioral psychologist too. Okay, verbal behavior instruction, another communication approach, evidence-based. It was developed by Skinner himself, and it takes a far more behavioral approach to teaching basic communication functions. There's much more focus on either speech or sign as opposed to using picture symbols to communicate within verbal behavior. And typical of the behavioral field, if you don't know this already, the behavioral field likes to have its own jargon, likes to have its own name for everything there is to do. And verbal behavior really has this. So it teaches simple, have I got them here? Yeah. So it teaches simple tasks like requesting, and those are called mands in verbal behavior. Echoic is when you want somebody to repeat something you've said. Tacts are actually just labeling something. So when they ask them, this is a cow, say cow, cow. That's label, that's tacts. You don't need to know all these words, but I'm just pointing out. So within verbal behavior, there's all these specific labels that are used for the functions of language that are taught. Okay, moving on to the social skill area. So that's the triad of impairments we talked about. We'll talk now about the social skills area. Behavior, communication, and social skills. So one is on peer training. This is talking about the use of peers as mentors for social interactions. So this is one that has been researched. Basically using peers, neurotypical peers, as facilitators for social play is what this is showing. It needs to be monitored carefully, and there needs to be some orientation for those neurotypical peers around the students with autism that they're acting as peer tutors for. It can get carried away. Those little, they're usually girls that like to have that role, can turn into little tyrant mothers sometimes to the kids with autism. So yeah, it does take monitoring, but that is one of the approaches that has been studied. Another one is a circle of friends. Again, really it's a structured way of ensuring inclusion. Again, needs careful monitoring, but specific people within this is usually within the education system, within the school body, are identified as the circle of friends around an individual with ASD, and they model and teach social interactions for the individual with ASD, and in some cases take on the role of curbing the behaviors of other children who might be bullying or teasing the child within the circle. So again, some training, training and coaching is definitely necessary for the circle of friends approach. Again, it's used in an integrated setting. All right, social stories, or stories for social understanding. This is another researched practice. It's another form of visual, really, and quite valuable for helping people with social understanding. So many people with autism within social situations, social contexts, can't figure out what other people are thinking, what other people are thinking of them, and how they should behave or what would be an appropriate response within that situation. So using a story for enhancing social understanding can help them do that. How to respond, relate to what others are perceiving, first of all, how to respond themselves in those social situations. Because remember, we're talking about a brain that doesn't naturally perform those skills, doesn't naturally interpret what another person is thinking. In fact, they lack what's called theory of mind. You've probably heard this piece, or you heard it in Module 1. And so they can't figure out exactly what another person might be thinking or feeling about this situation. But a social story can help them do that. So, okay, I'll finally talk about it. I keep avoiding using the term social story because it's trademarked. This was developed by an educator, Carol Gray, in the US, in Michigan. And it's kind of a US thing to trademark what you've developed, right? So in essence, you're not supposed to call what you're doing a social story unless you've been trained by her and you're following the formula that she's developed for social stories. And there's value in that because you can do social stories wrong, for sure, and you can make things worse for the individual if you don't write them just correctly. But whether you actually have to be trained only by Carol Gray, I don't know, but that's the rule anyway. So I think, do I have one here? Yes. So here's a sample, but I find this one actually quite complex. Social stories are more often simple, very simple, about 3 or 4 sentences as opposed to paragraphs the way this one has here. And they're used as a rehearsal strategy for a social situation that you know has been problematic in the past. And so you set up a rehearsal time to read the social story, and it gives the person something to, strategies to use when they enter that social situation again. Okay. So that is an evidence-based practice as well, which is great because for quite a number of years it wasn't, but there have been some research studies now done on that, and it proved that they were helping. Okay, sensory issues. So you also heard in Module 1 that a number of people with ASD, a great number actually, experience differences in their sensory perceptions: smell, taste, vision, hearing, balance, and so the vestibular, and proprioception, which is the sense of where your body is in space and what your body's doing. So they can experience either hyper or hyposensitivity. There are such a thing as sensory integration disorders, and an OT has developed what's called sensory integration therapy. Sensory integration therapy itself is not considered an evidence-based practice for ASD. The therapy in and of itself. However, the input of occupational therapists in intervention plans for OT has been invaluable over the last 20 years. Do we have any OTs in the room today? No. Because of this whole sensory difference area. So what they are able to assist with is intervention planning in related to that either less sensitivity of the senses, or hypersensitivity of any of those senses that people with ASD experience. So some of those things, yeah, I just talked about that one, relate to a sensory diet where people have throughout their day regular exposure to sensory needs, because if they're hyposensitive, their central nervous system is craving input for those sensory experiences. And if you don't provide it on a regular basis, they're going to find ways to get it, which are probably less appropriate and more maladaptive than what you could have them do by providing regular access. So I'm not sure that's clear to you. Let me give you an example. A kid who is hyposensitive to smells and tastes. These are the kids that you might know some of that will go into the fridge and drink the vinegar, or look for the hot sauce and eat it, or bite into an onion, or they'll go under the sink looking for the cleaners and things that are dangerous, even bleaches and so on, because they're a strong, powerful smell or taste sensation, because they're not even registering most of the smells and tastes that the rest of us experience, but they have to get something really powerful to get it. And so those kids will be constantly trying to get away from you, trying to get to the fridge, trying to get to the laundry room to find those strong smells. They're also sometimes the kids who will inappropriately smear their feces and so on, because that powerful smell is a registration that they don't, a smell sensation they don't get otherwise. So sometimes those behaviors are related to that. If instead you provide them with regular access to some strong, powerful smells or tastes throughout their day, you'll eliminate that constantly seeking behavior because they know they're going to get it. They know it's going to happen in their schedule at 10 o'clock, at 11 o'clock, at 12 o'clock. They get that explosion. If that makes it a little clearer, does it? So I did want to say that although sensory integration therapy itself is not included in the established group, there is now research being done on a lot of these other components around sensory differences that is showing benefit and positive outcomes for people with ASD. So we now have some PhD OTs who are able to do the research on sensory differences and applications of things like the sensory diet. So it's coming, it's not there yet. Okay, biomedical interventions. So this information is listed on the Center for Disease Control in USA of another area, and you're going to hear more about the whole medications area from Dr. King this afternoon. He's here, but where did he go? Must be in the hall. So, first thing about medications is to understand is that there is not a medication that treats ASD. So when you get questions from parents about that, that's the first answer. There isn't a medication specifically to treat ASD, but there are medications that can be helpful in treating specific areas of difficulty and specific behaviors or anxiety that people with ASD experience, but not ASD as a whole. So that is a question you may get, because especially parents who are calling you who've just received the diagnosis and they're crying and they don't know what this term even means are going to say, there must be a pill, because we see it on TV, there's a pill for everything now, right? Except that the side effects are worse than the disability. And so they think there's got to be a pill that will make this all go away or be better. So you'll hear more about that from Dr. King this afternoon. So really, so there's also lots of homeopathic approaches to ASD that are out there that people try. Most of them are as yet unproven, but people will try them. Vitamin supplements, mineral supplements, and so on that claim to make a difference in the nervous systems and the brain development of people with ASD. So for your roles, really, the only recommendation that you can make to a parent or caregiver is that they discuss this issue with their physician. You can't really take a stand on saying, you should get this medication, or here's one that I know works. It has to go through a doctor, so really your position is to ensure that they discuss these things with their physician. And then they're going to say, but my physician doesn't know anything about ASD. And then they'll be starting down the road of parents of educating the many, many people in their child's life. Okay. Dietary. Dietary changes are listed on the Center for Disease Control website in terms of interventions for ASD, although they're not considered evidence-based practice, certainly not for all people with ASD. So it isn't that as soon as you have a diagnosis of ASD, they should automatically go on this diet. The only way to determine if it would be helpful for an individual is on a trial basis. So the research hasn't proven it because it's so individualized. And what is stated there is that it needs to be a trial of at least 3 months in order to see whether there are benefits to changing the child's diet. So the diet that is generally recommended is gluten-free and or casein-free. And so that is both dairy and wheat removed from the diet. And you can imagine that is not easy to do. Although you see more and more and more now, even in the grocery stores, lots of gluten-free and casein-free items for sale. 20 years ago, there was none of that. However, families really do need to consider the impact on family life, on school life, trying to maintain that diet when the child is at school and taking lunches to school. There's a huge impact on the family, because essentially you can't do this for one child within the home. You're going to have to do a gluten and casein-free diet household-wise. So it's not that easy to implement. If it helps, if it makes a difference for that child, it's worth all the trouble that it is. But if it's not helping in a major way, it can be a huge impact on everybody else, including the siblings. So that's really the questions people need to ask. Families will tell you, though, on an anecdotal basis, the families who really believe that removing gluten and casein changed their child, they can tell you that if they have a cookie or something at school that had gluten is the wheat one, yeah, had gluten in it, when they come home from school, they know. They can tell behavioral changes in their child by one item throughout the day. So they firmly believe it's helping. Others have tried it, not seen any differences. So there you are. All right, family supports. 4 areas. Well, it's important to recognize that an intervention plan isn't only for the child with ASD, but it includes the whole family picture. 4 areas that most families are in need of help with: information, obviously, clear and accurate information on ASD and what kind of things help, financial assistance and planning, services, access, and life planning, as the child ages. Usually not the first thing, but needs to not be forgotten. So information, first of all, there's lots of sources for that, and a few listed here, but lots of sources for people to get information in York Region about ASD and about the service system that you can direct people to. Life planning, again, as I said, people need some ongoing case management for the changing needs of their child as they grow. They need to start thinking about estate planning. And again, this is not usually what families are going, unless their child is older to begin with, when they got their diagnosis. It's not going to be the first need that they're thinking about. But it mustn't be forgotten in terms of the overall plan for that individual, especially for individuals who are starting to reach adulthood. On the financial side, families will need to learn about the sources of funding support. There are places they can access funds from the ministry to help them with home programs and supplies and so on. They'll need to learn about tax deductions that they can get for a child with disabilities, and then about future planning for financial needs in the future. And the services, what's available by age group, what the wait lists are like. I think it's important that when families need to hear the real information on these things. Almost all of these services have wait lists. Their families are going to be very frustrated by the fact that their doctor has told them you need to get doing something right away to help your child, and then they're going to discover that to get into the intensive behavioral intervention program in York Region, there's a wait list of 5 years. And so they're going to have to start looking in other places to try and see whether they can afford to do intensive behavioral intervention, or whether they can get that kind of help elsewhere, or they can do it themselves by learning about it. They need to know where those are located, what kind of supports are available for school, and so on. Now, one of the things that the partnership is working on that will be an aid to people at the front door in all the agencies is a database of services. So we have a working group called Mapping and Pathways. They have developed a database that is very comprehensive, that goes across all ages from birth to adulthood, all levels of disability from mild, moderate to severe, from universal services that are available to anybody to intensive services designed specifically for ASD. And we have been able to partner with 211. You're familiar with the new 211 service, relatively new. It's like 411 for special needs services, social services. And they are developing all of that information into a searchable database. So you could actually put in Asperger's, age 18, and a postal code, and it'll pull up all the services that are available within that postal code region for that group of people. I can tell you that'll be small, that one that I said. Postal code you probably don't want to do because it's probably not going to be on their street, but it'll pull up all the services that are within a region for a person. So that is going to be available. It's supposed to be available by November because you're going to be trained on it in November, in the November modules. So hopefully it will be. All right. Provincial programs. You need to know a bit about the provincial programs that exist that families with a child or adult with ASD can access. So there are the provincial speech language programs. This is for York Region Preschool Speech and Language. It's housed out of Markham Stouffville Hospital for preschool children up to the age 5. There's the Provincial Intensive Behavioural Intervention Program, and again, there are specific requirements around eligibility. There are wait lists, and then there are specific components to what that service can look like. You don't need to know what all those are. You just need to be able to warn parents. There are specific eligibility to get into it, and there's going to be a wait list, and they will tell you what the services are that you can access, and then you're going to connect them to KINARC. That's housed at KINARC. But you don't have to worry about that yet. You're going to learn about that in future modules. There are also provincial ABA programs. So it's not as intensive as IBI, but there are specific group service models. There are, here in York Region, a number of service providers who are partnering to deliver those. And again, the eligibility is much more open. It's any child with with any autism spectrum disorder diagnosis from birth to 18. Yeah. And there are wait lists for it too, but not as long because people come in for a block of service and then go out again. So people are circling through them faster. All right. Respite. I wanted to put this one in because I think it's really important to recognize respite as a critical component of an intervention plan. And you're going to have parents who are very focused on getting something for their child who will say, I don't need help. I don't need respite. I need something for my child, not for me. That happens all the time. However, we need to help parents recognize they're in this for the long haul and they've got to stay healthy. And the siblings have got to stay healthy too. They've got to have their parents' attention as well. So they need to be able to remain able to cope. The health of the family is critical. So once they've gotten something going for their child, it's critical that they recognize, make use of the respite services that are available. And respiteservices.com here in York Region can link them up, and there are a variety of different types of models, in-home respite, out-of-home respite. They can put together a respite plan that's individualized for their child as well, with some funding. And the education system. We're almost through, folks, about 5 minutes. Obviously, the education system is not included as evidence-based practice, but it's a critical component of an overall plan. So I think worth mentioning here, because it's going to be a big part of the family's focus for years with their child. And it is often a struggle. There's just no other way to put it. I know we have lots of educators here in the field. But for parents, it's a case of trying to get the right class, the right teacher, the right school, the right supports coming into that class for their child. And not once, but it usually is that case year after year after year. So that whole thing can be quite frustrating. And the whole process of trying to help other people understand your child's needs and how much of that falls onto the parent to do so. You know, I have 3 kids that are grown now, but in their whole school careers, there was only one kid, my middle son, and 1 year where we weren't happy with his class placement and the way things were set up. It was a split class. And the stress we went through of meetings and phone calls and calling this person above that person and so on. And that was once. And I thought, our families go through this every year, over and over again. I can't imagine how much stress that is on them. Fortunate thing with the York ASD partnership, both boards are on the partnership. Both boards, we're very fortunate in York Region. Both boards have a lot of training, a lot of supports for people with ASD. It's never enough, but both do make a real effort. They're both members of the partnership, so they have committed to this process of making things easier for parents. And philosophically, their approach is to partner with parents. So, and that's part of what the ASD partnership is facilitating. So part of our job is to help parents learn those negotiation and collaboration skills that are necessary to get what they need, what their child needs, in a positive, constructive working relationship rather than a battling relationship with the boards of ed. And then just focusing on adults one last time, the developmental services that I mentioned before. People will need to know if their child is in the teen years and approaching 18 or they're 18 or older. The access process there, and there are specific requirements around that process as well. You don't need to know them, but you need to know that to inform them about it so that they can know what to expect when they hit that door at Developmental Services. I believe you have a slide on crisis prevention, but I'm not going to cover that one. At some point in a family's life, depending on the behaviors of their loved one, they may need to consider their own training around crisis prevention for handling some of those behaviors. So to summarize, as I've been saying throughout, you're not expected to be experts in all of these evidence-based practices by any means. No one really can be. But it's so helpful in your roles to know their names and to understand the terms and the acronyms that are used. You know, there's hundreds of acronyms in this field too. And actually, in a future model, we have a whole little piece on acronyms that you're going to have some fun with. But you're either going to find, so you need to be careful in 2 ways. If you start using acronyms and the parents don't know what they are, that frustrates the parents. But you're also as likely to find that the parents are going to come to you quite educated already, using all kinds of acronyms, and you don't want to be there not knowing what those acronyms stand for. So it's helpful for you to understand them as well. So what we're hoping to provide you is a basic knowledge that will allow you to discuss these topics if they're raised by families at different ages and stages. And you'll never know them all. And in fact, with all the years I've been in the field, one of the lines you need to have, because the family's going to call up and say, have you heard about XYZ therapy? And you need that line that says, that's fascinating. I don't know anything about that. Can you send me a link to that or some more information on that? Because frankly, we learn more, most often when there's something new being tried, something new out there, we learn it from the families. They find it first, and they tell us about it, and then we have to research, find some papers on it, and so on.